Welcome back, everybody, to What the Health. I'm Dr. Greg Eckel, and I've got my colleague to the north, Dr. Christina Bjorndal, naturopathic doctor. She's an authority in the treatment of mental illness, such as depression, anxiety, bipolar disorders, and eating disorders. She's overcome many of these mental health challenges herself, so writes passionately and speaks passionately on these topics. She's a gifted speaker, loves to share her message. She's been out with Jennifer McCarthy and many more on multiple wellness interviews. Really excited to have her on our show. She's also recognized as one of the top NDs to follow by two independent organizations. Dr. Chris has helped many patients achieve physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, and we are lucky to have her on the show today. Welcome aboard, Dr. Chris.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, I like to ask my guests, for our listeners out there, you know, your unique approach and solutions. And you wrote such a really nice thing here of how to manage your mind so you aren't at the mercy of it. And all too often I like to say it's a dangerous neighborhood to go into by yourself, right? And so I'm excited to have that conversation with you as the world just seems to get crazier and crazier. We need to really take care of that mental health space. So, I'm really excited for the gifts that you're going to share with our listeners today. What aspects? So when you wrote that, I mean, when you bring that up, like, what is your story of regaining your mental health? Because clearly you've got a couple books that I want you to mention here and bring up and talk about. We've got Beyond the Label and your own journey, right? A lot of us, is that how you got into naturopathic medicine?
Yeah,
It
it
is.
is. Yeah. So the main book I have is Beyond the Label, 10 Steps to Improve Your Mental Health with Naturopathic Medicine. And my journey to becoming a naturopathic doctor was through my own struggles with my mental health. And that started in high school with an eating disorder. And that happened really, well, a couple of things. One sort of side note on that. The year prior to developing the eating disorder, I was treated with antibiotics for
Ooh.
6 months to treat acne. And so we all know now this connection between the gut microbiome and the brain. At that time, this is in the mid-1980s, there was no conversation going on about that. So that's the beauty of research and discovery. So now we know there's this connection. But for me, what happened was I think there's a connection for me with this gut relationship between the gut disruption, because I was treated with many antibiotics in my childhood. But with the eating disorder, I was just over at a friend's house after school, and we ate a lot of junk food. And then I heard her go to the bathroom and purge, and I was quite alarmed. I didn't know what was going on. I thought she was sick. Like, did she need help?
Sure.
And then when I asked her what was going on, she said, "Oh, this is just something I do to manage my weight, and you might want to think about doing that too."
Wow.
Yeah, and it was a really sort of innocent comment that packed a lot of punch to my impressionable teenage self.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, well, maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe. So I started to engage in that behavior. And then it really became a coping mechanism in terms of, with the more stressed I got, the more I then turned to sugar to like as a soothing, to soothe myself or calm
Hit the
myself.
dopamines, right?
Exactly. Like that's kind of became my form of cocaine, right? So there was just this pattern with, the more stress I had, the more I would engage in that activity. And so then basically fast forward to university, I'm still engaging in bulimia. And, but then I found myself in a place that I'd never been before, which was depressed and anxious. And I ended up at the University Student Services, and they prescribed an antidepressant for me, which I took. And then a few months after that, I found myself in another place I'd never been before, which was not sleeping, very euphoric, and basically I spun out of control in a delusional psychotic state.
Wow.
Yeah, it took 6 people to wrestle me into a straitjacket, and off I went to the hospital, where I was injected with haloperidol, which is a powerful antipsychotic, left in a rubber room to come back to reality. And when I came back to reality, I was then diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1 and sent on my way with more medication. And what I did with that is I pretty much stuffed it as far down as I could and locked it away in this dark part of myself that I dared never to look, and I didn't want anybody to know about this. And so I then just continued marching on in the world, wearing this mask that I'm okay on the outside, but I'm not really doing very well on the inside. And a lot of people wear these masks. You know, we put on this front that we're doing well when maybe we're not. And eventually I graduated. I ended up working in the corporate world, continuing this. I was an overachiever, so continued this overachieving behavior, climbed the corporate ladder, ended up reporting to a CEO. But again, for most of the time was quite depressed, but functioning. And I ended up having a suicide attempt in 1994, which left me in a coma with kidney failure. I was on dialysis, was told I would need a kidney transplant.
Yeah.
And that is the spiritual turning point for me, or was the spiritual turning point for me. So I was in recovery. I was very sick, and I was not happy that I was still here, right? Because I mean, this isn't, I shouldn't joke about it, but basically I'm an overachiever in every other aspect of my life, but I can't get that right, you know?
Right.
So I figured, and by all accounts, I really, you know, even my nephrologist said, I don't know how you're still here given what happened. So I realized, okay, well, there's gotta be a reason then why I'm here. And so I was given this book to read by Marianne Williamson, A Return to Love. And in that book, she has a quote on surrender, which goes along these lines, that surrender is not about breaking out of anything. It's a gentle melting into who we really are. So we let down our armor and we discover that all that God needs is just one sincere, surrendered moment where nothing matters more than love. And it was at that point that I realized that I didn't love myself. Right? I was really at war with myself in my mind, my body, my spirit. I did not want anybody to know about the bipolar piece of the puzzle. And so then I figured I needed to figure out another way to navigate this journey, because the way I was doing it up until that point wasn't working.
Yeah.
And then that's what led me to, I have a friend, the same friend that gave me the book to read. She was into naturopathic medicine, and she encouraged me to see a naturopathic doctor. I ended up at a mental health regained forum. They were having a discussion, and I went to that. I listened to a doctor. His name is Abraham Hoffer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I listened to him talk, and I became his patient. I started his protocol. And I felt better for the first time I hadn't felt free of depression or anxiety in the 15 years prior.
Wow.
And then I experienced my first year where I felt free of it. I was still taking the pharmaceutical medications at the same time. And then I just began looking at my life and sat with this question: if money didn't matter, what would I be doing? And the answer that kept coming up repeatedly was to go back to school and study naturopathic medicine so I could help people regain my mental health, or regain their mental health as I have regained mine. Yeah. And so that's basically the journey.
That's huge. That is huge. So yeah, you've gone through it yourself and hit that moment. That's spiritual. So do you see that with your patients as well? Like hitting that moment of like, the only way through here is to surrender? Or, you know, how do you get to that point with your patients and your clients?
Yeah, it's sometimes it's almost like, you know, sometimes with addictions, where we have to say to people that they need to get to that bottom.
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah.
Not that I want my patients to necessarily get to the bottom, but sometimes we need to get there in order to turn to the light.
Yeah.
And so I'm hopefully intervening with my patients at a point where they're not at the bottom,
Yeah.
that I can help them to turn to the light and learn to navigate their mental health in a way. But I do talk with them and introduce these ideas around spirituality and love and compassionate, having this compassionate approach to yourself. Because a lot of people, a key question I ask everyone is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you love yourself?
Yeah.
And most patients, they don't have a high number. And so for people who are listening, answer that for yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's odd how we get this weird programming, again, dangerous neighborhood to go into by yourself. Like, we're our own worst critics. There's some voices in there that are just like, just mean.
That's right. That's right.
I like to say, I tell them, I tell patients and myself, like, hey, thanks for sharing, and I'm going to go do this, because I feel like the more we push up against them, the stronger they get, right? And then we get kind of stuck over looking at stuff that we're giving energy to things that we don't want, but
Right.
but we get more of it because there's more energy going that way. Yeah. That aspect that you talked about too of, locking away kind of that shadow stuff. And I see that so much culturally of like, oh, we just want to just sweep it under the rug or put it over there like it doesn't exist. And I mean, there's no way to be other than going through it. But we get into, that's where I think a lot of addictions come from, or the eating disorders, or all of the mental illnesses, we're just not able to look at it, right? Have you found that in your practice too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of shame
Yeah.
around, and with eating disorders, I mean, more so bulimia, because it's one that is done in secrecy and hidden. With anorexia, it's, you can visually see the effects of the eating disorder. So
Yeah.
with bulimia, it's not as obvious, right?
Right.
And so then there becomes a lot of shame and secrecy around this. And, a common thing I hear about my book is that I was so vulnerable, and I did share the experience, but, it took me a good 7 years to be able to put that out there, because
Yeah.
I also was quite fearful about sharing the experience, because up until that point, I hadn't been public about having bipolar disorder
Yeah.
professionally. I mean, I'm sure some people knew, but I really wasn't public about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I still had a lot of fear around, and this is just like 2 years ago, I still had a lot of fear around and coming out
Right.
of the closet, so to speak.
Well, it's super exposing and it makes you vulnerable, right? And that, I think, is the, most courageous and strongest position that one can take. But it's super hard to do that, right? You're just opening yourself up, you feel like, to whatever, right?
Mhm.
How has that been for you? So the last 2 years of becoming public and putting it out there. I mean, I've seen you like really well received, and it's a very potent message because you've been through it. And I think, turning your journey into kind of the path for, there's so many people that have these issues, that it's just, it's really important to be able to discuss it publicly. Have you had any negative feedback on that?
No,
Yeah.
yeah, there hasn't been. No, it's been nothing but positive. And I mean, now my practice is, I have a wait list and it's full. And so it's, I mean, it's, no, it's been a positive experience. And
Yeah.
I think for me, what frustrates me the most, I mean, this just happened to me yesterday. I've got this patient, and he's been through the whole gamut with from the mental health side on the Western side, with ECT and ketamine and every medication you can think of. And the message he's getting from the psychiatric profession is, you're not going to get better. And the message I'm trying to give
Wow.
him is, you can get better.
Right.
This, so it's, and I just get so frustrated, because unfortunately that is the message that a lot of people are hearing, is
It
that.
is, it's exactly why I have this podcast called What the Health, because how can we, I mean, it's just because the system doesn't see people get better, right? And so why plug into that, right? We're the doctors that leave the door open, right? I'm sure you're not making 100% claims for folks, but to even offer the possibility, and you've seen it, like the clinical evidence is in, you've done it yourself. You've done it with, hundreds or thousands of patients. And so the reality is there. That's why I want folks that if you're listening, please share this podcast with your loved ones, because this is how change happens. This is how we get the truth out of like what reality is. Like, this is very powerful information. What do you feel like? Why is the establishment just saying you're never going to get better? Like, what a potent negative message. Like, that goes deep in there. I see people all the time. They're said, oh, well, I have a chemical imbalance. I've got to be on these drugs the rest of my life. It's
right.
like,
And that's the party line.
that's the party line. That is such bullshit. I mean, I'm going to call it what it is. Like, that is, it is. It's like, we know it. Like, I've seen, I like to say there's not a drug I can't get somebody off of. Now, we don't do it willy-nilly, and sometimes it's a very integrative approach, right? My moniker is kind of where East meets West naturally. But, so there's a whole continuum of care that's what's right for this individual in front of us. So why do you think that's the party line? Like, what is that?
Well, I think that's just their paradigm, right?
Yeah.
That's so if the only tool you have in your toolbox is a hammer, then that's all you got is a hammer. So you keep bringing out bigger sizes of hammers, but if your hammers aren't working and you don't have any other tools, then that's it, right?
Yeah.
So they're not looking outside the box, and they're not looking for other options. Whereas in our profession, we have many tools in our toolbox.
Yeah.
So and this speaks to health, is that it's multifactorial. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution. So my experience with my mental health, even though we have the same labels, perhaps, of depression, anxiety, bulimia, bipolar disorder,
Yeah.
The way it is expressed or experienced or manifested within me is not the same as it is perhaps for you. And that's what's, I think, a big piece that's missing as well, is that it's this in Western medicine, it's kind of a one-size-fits-all solution. But if that solution doesn't work, then they're at a loss as to what to do.
Right.
So, just another example I was going to give you, this other woman from in Manitoba, and I'm in Alberta, so a couple of provinces over. She contacted me about her son, and she said, "Where are the success stories?"
Yeah.
Right? You don't hear about the success stories. So that's one of my goals, is to be, I guess, to give more space or voice,
more
or
platform.
Platform,
for
that's
that.
a better word. Yeah.
Yeah.
For people to understand that we have a whole profession. I mean, I'm not the only one. Yes, I've got the lived experience, but there's a whole profession that can help you here. A whole naturopathic profession. So anyway.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. I mean, it is such an important thing. I mean, there's been such stigma, and it's rampant. I mean, I see it, every day over the last 18 years of clinical practice. It's like, wow, this is everywhere. So it's a good lead in then to, what are the 4 aspects of health that you think are important to address the overall health? So, you were talking about individualizing the treatment. What might be different for me is different for you, or, you could have 10 people in the room and come up with 15 different plans of action for them, right? Mm-hmm. So what are those 4 areas that you've kind of boiled it down to for folks?
Yeah, so the 4 sort of big picture areas that I think we have to address is the physical level, and then the mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Yeah.
And again, in that Western system, we're focusing just on the physical level.
Yeah.
And unless you're working with a psychologist, then you're probably going to obviously be addressing the mental and emotional. But really, if we're going to talk about holistic medicine and treating people from that perspective, we have to be looking at all 4 areas of health. So
how do you do that? Do you do that on your intake form, or like you just front forward leading with the, once you get into those higher levels, meeting people where they're at, how do you do that?
Well, so when I meet with people, then I start with explaining that there's these 4 aspects. Yeah. And then I explain that with respect to the physical, first, what we do want to understand is there's 3 macro systems. within us, essentially. So you have your neurotransmitters, you have your neuroendocrine or hormonal system, and then you have your organs of detoxification, and which includes your immune system. And mental health conditions and symptoms of depression, anxiety, disordered eating, irritability, sleep issues, etc., can be in any one of those three macro systems. And again, in Western medicine, they're usually just focused only on neurotransmitters, which is the only hammer that they're using. But we have to recognize that every single hormone in the body, if there's an imbalance in that hormone, a deficiency or excess, can result in mental health symptoms. So that neuroendocrine system is really important, as well as the organs of detoxification. So in my case, I was working on all three of those macro systems. And that's how I address the physical level, is making sure that we are putting in these foundational building blocks. And that's where I started with this when I started on this journey. I started with that. But then I was bumping up against myself. I was bumping up against my limiting beliefs, my core beliefs, my shadow beliefs, and this inner critic that was constantly beating me up. And so then I take people through how to manage that, how to work through all that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And is that do you have an online offering? You do it local? I saw you have like 3 components of your care that you do there.
Yeah. So I have the one-on-one. So if you're working with me one-on-one, but then I've created, because of the wait list, I've created this online course, which then there's 3 avenues that you can go down with that course. You can either just take the webinars, or you can have the webinars with calls with me, or you can do the weekly version, which is live with me.
Oh, awesome. Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And that's where I go through all the 10 steps that I
love it.
Which we'll get into. Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. What about, okay, so those are the 3 kind of on the physical level. So then you get in the mental, emotional, and you said you had the spiritual. What was the 4th? I missed one.
Yeah, that's it. Physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
And
awesome.
And then the way to support that physical level is really with diet, right? Diet and nutrition and supplementation and herbs. So the main components of that physical level are diet, sleep, and exercise.
Awesome.
So, what I want people to understand is that serotonin, which is the main neurotransmitter involved in depression and anxiety, is derived from tryptophan. And tryptophan is an essential amino acid. So what that means is you can't make it yourself. You have to get it from your diet. And same with dopamine, which is another really important neurotransmitter involved in depression, but also with addiction. That's derived from another essential amino acid called phenylalanine. So the other book I wrote it's more of just a diet plan. It's not really a book. Like it's a roadmap to follow from an eating perspective. It's called The Essential Diet, because what people have to understand is there's essential nutrients, and the word essential means you can't make these things yourself.
Yeah.
We have to get them from our diet. And my diet was really, really bad. And the only reason I got better was because Dr. Hoffer prescribed supplements to fill in the gaps. And when I went to naturopathic school, one of the assignments we had in nutrition was we had to analyze our diet. And even at that time, the only essential amino acid I was deficient in was tryptophan.
Wow.
So I was like, oh my God, like nobody in the last 18 years at this point had ever asked me what I was eating.
Sure.
So I can't emphasize that enough. Like we can supplement ourselves for sure, but from a root cause, if you've got to figure out what the gaps are in your nutritional, in what you're feeding yourself.
Do you use a certain program to do that analysis for folks? Or are you doing kind of old school, write it down and
Yeah, I have them write down what they're eating, just usually for 3 days, and then I run it through a program.
Nice. Yeah, that's what we do here as well. I think all new patients, even if they're coming in for pain, I'm looking at their diet, because that's what I tell them. Like, look, if you don't have these building blocks, it doesn't matter what we lay on top of that. Your body needs these to heal. And if you don't have them, it doesn't matter if we have the perfect formula of herbs or, supplements or whatever, it just isn't going to happen.
Well,
So
there's
that's,
lots of foods that are inflammatory,
yes.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. So you've got the diet definitely as the essential component. You've got the book. Is it the book called Essentials
Yeah,
or
it's
Essential
called,
Diet?
yeah, The Essential Diet, Eating for Mental
Awesome.
Health.
And
Yeah,
then you have a workbook that goes with that as well.
yeah, the third book is Moving Beyond, a Journal into Self-Discovery, which is a companion to Beyond the Label, which is
Got it.
the
The main
main book, like the
offering.
big,
Yeah. Let's
that
see that.
big
Love it.
one.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. So we got the physical. Anything else on the physical plane that you wanted to cover there?
Well, I just wanted to mention, so just with respect to diet as well, that
Yeah.
we look at it from a macro perspective, a micro perspective, but also this environmental piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So, but we'll get to that a little bit further, but I just want to mention that now. And then
Yes.
also on the physical level, exercise, right? So exercise, it's been said that the most overutilized prescription for depression and anxiety is pharmaceuticals, and the
Yeah.
most underutilized is exercise. And you know what, don't get me wrong, like I have been there, I get this. Like there's been days when I've been down and depressed, that the only thing I've accomplished in a day is getting dressed, moving from my room to the door and
Mm-hmm.
putting my shoes on. And sometimes that's taken me 6, 10, 8, 12 hours. That's all I've done.
Yeah.
But I get out and I can, and as hard as that was, I can tell you that I never once have come back feeling worse
Yeah.
than when I
From
went out.
like doing a walk or something like that. Yeah.
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 So sometimes exactly what you're resisting is the medicine that you need.
Mm.
And this is hard. So you may have to enlist support here. And this is
Yeah.
another really piece of the puzzle with depression. You know, I used to say to people, you know, asking me to reach out when I'm depressed is like asking a
Yeah.
deaf person to hear or a blind person to see. It's like I'm physically impaired in that area. But
Yeah.
this is where, when you're well, you have to enlist that support team where they then can be the ones that recognize if they don't hear from you, or, you know, you set up a weekly walk or something that is preferably that you can do with someone,
Yeah.
because the sense of community is also really important.
Oh, great. Those are awesome suggestions. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cause it's like the last thing that's, folks are like, what are you talking about, doc? I got to move my body. I don't even want to get off the couch. Like I'm
That's
so
right.
depressed. Um,
And make it something that you like, right?
yeah.
It's got to be something that you enjoy. Even if you just put on some uplifting music and just get your toes tapping. I know for me, music really does shift me. And I'm not a music therapist or anything, but I just know that, you know, when you hear some music that makes you, it just does lift your spirit. It really does.
Yeah.
So do something that you enjoy. Don't do something because you think you have to do, you know, start becoming a marathon runner. If you don't like running, then don't do
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Right?
I really think around the frequencies and song and music there's going to be a bigger incorporation of that into medicine. Just it makes sense, and what the research is showing and the experiences and feelings, we lock that into different areas of our brain. And you're right, it is very uplifting for most everybody. I mean, there's, maybe a few folks that don't really like music, but that's very few and far between.
I don't know if I've met anybody that doesn't like
Yeah.
music.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a couple out there, right?
Maybe. Oh,
Yeah.
sure.
All right. So that on the physical level, any other aspects there? So we covered the diet, we covered the movement, we covered
Well, the other one is sleep.
environmental. Oh,
Yeah,
sleep.
Yeah,
Right.
sleep is a really big piece of the puzzle. And
Yeah.
I think that nowadays, especially, people's sleep hygiene is being compromised with being on devices.
Oh,
So, you know, one of the biggest suggestions I can give people is really to set those phones aside and iPads and 2 hours before bed, preferably, just
yeah.
because the light from these phones, and I know you can put filters but it's not just the light, it's the EMF effect as well. So I think we just need to break up with these things and set them aside. It's,
Yeah.
use them when they're necessary, but not
Yeah.
taking them to bed with you,
Right.
which there's a lot of people are. And because I see a lot of problems with sleep, and then if you're, if you're not sleeping well, then that sets you up for hormone imbalances, and which then can trickle down and affect you from a mood perspective. So, and then with managing bipolar disorder, on the mania side, sleep is critical. So if you're not sleeping, that can trip you into or be a risk factor for psychosis. So it's really, really important that we make sure people are sleeping
on a regular schedule there.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, so we're getting into halfway through our show. This is What the Health. I'm Dr. Greg Eckel. I've got Dr. Chris on the line with us, and we're talking mental health. And if you are just tuning in, you can go to naturecuresclinic.com. You want to definitely tune in to the beginning of this show. Please share us with friends and family. This is really important information to get out to your loved ones. This really could change and save their lives. Really, is the really the message here. So where do you want to go from here? So we talked about the physical level. You want to move up basically your framework. You've really put this together. I love talking with naturopathic physicians, as as a naturopath, our language is so ingrained in us, and it's so refreshing to hear, like this is happening around the globe, right? You're up in Alberta, I'm in Oregon. We have colleagues around the planet. It is really a different way of thinking about health, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. I think it's one of the only professions that does take into consideration the mental, emotional, and spiritual side of things. Yeah. And so on that note, what I look at is the framework in terms of the 10 steps. The foundation is diet, sleep, exercise, and then managing stress. And then with that managing stress, we want to look at our thoughts and our emotions, how we behave and react in the world, understanding the role that the environment can play from 3 perspectives. So we mentioned the quality of the air, food, and water. So just a note about that. Typically people look at mental health conditions as a deficiency. So you're not making enough of a neurotransmitter, for example. And we've talked about how it may not just be neurotransmitters involved. It could be that you have a hormone imbalance, or there could be an inflammatory component due to food intolerance or leaky gut syndrome. But the other piece here is, with respect to the environment, is to understand that maybe there's something from the environment that is blocking a receptor. So it's not a deficiency problem. It's just that it's a blockage problem, that it can't get in the door. They're making the neurotransmitter, but because of something from the environment blocking that receptor. So that is a different way of looking at things that we look at as naturopathic doctors that I haven't seen.
What are some big things that you see there that are blocking, or do you see anything there?
So if we do heavy metal testing, so usually it's mercury and lead. Mercury and lead are the two big factors that I see in heavy metal tests. And I know for myself, when I cleaned up my life from that environmental perspective, so eating organic and changing out products, hair, makeup, etc., shampoos and lotion, anything you're putting on your body, you're putting in your body.
Yeah.
So cleaning products, anything you're breathing in, stopped using perfume. Like they say, perfume is now the new secondhand smoke. So we just want to understand that these chemicals, there's a lot of disruption to the body can happen as a result of that. So the second part around the environment is the idea of genetics versus epigenetics. For myself, so I didn't mention this earlier, but I'm also adopted. And so with that, whenever I asked, why is this happening to me? I would get the answer, well, it's just genetic. There's nothing you can do, right?
Yeah.
Which is something I also feel is really disempowering to say to people.
Yeah.
Right? There's nothing you can do. And again, people hear that all the time.
What a message, right?
Yeah. And so the message that we have for you is there is something you can do. There is something you can do. And so because I couldn't look to the left or my right to verify the truth of that, I didn't accept it as the truth. And I continued to look for answers to why I was going through what I was going through. And so epigenetics basically means genes load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger.
Yeah.
So that's important for people to understand, and that's related to this environmental piece. And then the last area around the environment is this idea of neuroplasticity, which basically means your brain is not like a lump of cement. It has a bendy or plastic quality to it. A book that's of interest to people, or maybe of interest to people, is by Dr. Norman Doidge. He wrote the book called The Brain That Changes Itself. And he looks at a lot of different conditions like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and mental health conditions that are where he's worked with this neuroplasticity piece of the puzzle. So just understand that you can create new neural pathways. So you can learn to think a different way. And so that's really been a really important piece of the work that I do. And then the last area is looking at love and spirituality and compassion, ultimately wrapping everything up in that. Because at the end of the day, it all comes down, I think, to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I totally agree. So how do you go to that? So one, let's talk on kind of the environmental component. So you found you do some heavy metal testing with your patients. Do you run any, like, so for the genetic platform, right? You're not destined by the genes, but we need to know what you're operating with. So you do some genetic testing, or what do you do for that?
So the way I work is generally I start people off with on the first visit, and then I start them on figuring out, okay, well, what macro system is involved here. And if people aren't responding in this by the second or third visit, like if they're not getting better, and most patients are progressing. If they're not, that's usually when I'll do the testing.
Nice.
And I'll do more investigation. But I find that by making a few diet changes, like working on that foundation, like the exercise and managing the sleep, and then in the next visit, in the second visit, then I'm teaching them this framework that I use about how to start managing their mind and working with our core beliefs, our limiting beliefs, our distorted automatic thoughts. So I get into that work in the second visit. And usually I find that by working on that, people get better.
Yeah.
So I'm not as much of a micro, I take more a macro approach. But I will do testing, and I do blood work as well. So that's the main form of testing that I do in the first visit, is starting with blood work. And then I'll get to the more comprehensive tests if somebody's not progressing, which happens too.
Yeah. You know, I have very similar philosophy and practice. I like to say I treat people, not lab results, right? I think a lot of folks get into the laboratory testing is like, oh, I'm going to micromanage here. We're going to make this number move. I think they do it because it's easier to manage lab work than humans, right? And it's definitely, you've got to spend time and know and truly love your patients and listen, right? Because they're basically telling us the path right in front of us. So I do very similar. If they're not making progress, then we'll test, but I'd rather them get the therapies, treatments that they need and get that motion and movement going for them right out of the gate. And then if they're not responding the way we anticipate, then we have to dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
So that's super wise.
And we all know that we have to work on liver pathways and detoxification pathways in most of our patients. And so, you know, I'm doing that also as well. If, you know, sometimes it's definitely helpful to know if you're an over-methylator or an under-methylator with the 5-MTHR genetic SNP. But I find, like, I'll never forget this one patient. He was really depressed. He was young, like he was 18, had been suffering for a while. And he was so focused on this genetic piece that it had to be genetic. And I said, okay, well, that's fine. We can do the testing, but let's understand that there's these other pieces to the puzzle. And he was so convinced, and anyway, ran the test, and he didn't have that.
Wow.
And he was so, like, he just was so distraught because he thought that was the answer. Right. And I was trying to say to him, well, though there is an answer there, that doesn't mean that there's not hope for you. We don't want to put all our eggs. There's more than one egg in your basket. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So sometimes people put a lot of hope in that. And if it's not there, well, then they think, well, now what?
Right. Now we're back into the abyss of unknown, right? Interesting. So then the bigger one then is in that spiritual realm in getting into the discussion around love. And I'm in full agreement. I think there is the need for more love in this sphere of existence. And so how do you go there with your patients? Obviously it's in you bring it right in with the language right out of the gate. It's in your hierarchy or in your kind of meta system of how you address the human condition that we all find ourselves in. Do people have resistance around that, or how do you get there with folks?
Some people do. Yeah, for sure. Sometimes if, depending on their religious background too, that can or can't, I mean, sometimes they're more open to talking about that, but sometimes they're not. So it really just depends. I try to meet people where they're at.
Sure.
And one of the first ways into this is to figure out and ask not what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. And where did you learn to not love and value yourself? And this gets into the trauma piece. So a lot of people have trauma. We're all walking wounded. And, even, myself, I would say some people might not look at it this way, but for me, the adoption piece was really imprinted on me. And I opened my book with a discussion about how the wiring and the mental emotional state of the mother when you're in utero affects and imprints you as a child, as a developing fetus. And so for myself, I would imagine, I never got the chance to ask my biological mother what her emotional state was, but I would have gathered that somebody who has to make that decision, right, is not in a super happy place.
Right. Yeah.
So I was a very anxious child, and then the way I learned about being adopted, I was quite young, and I didn't understand exactly what that word meant when my parents explained it to me. So I processed it in my brain to mean that I was with my family temporarily.
Oh,
yeah. And so I didn't really attach very well.
Wow.
And I also processed it to mean that I wasn't wanted, that I'm not lovable. So give a whole list in my book of all these sort of core beliefs that I had.
Yeah.
So what I'm wanting to get to with my patients is what are your core beliefs?
Yeah.
And what's driving that? And then take them through this compassionate inquiry approach to learn to shift that conversation within themselves. So I start with a framework called the 7 R's of working with problematic thoughts and breaking the thought emotion cycle. And that, do we have time? Should I go through that?
Yeah, you know what? We do. We have We have about 20 minutes.
Okay.
About 15, let's say. We have 15. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just explain that, because I think for me, this is sort of the starting point into this inquiry around loving yourself and learning to moving into this spiritual piece. So, so the first R is just to recognize. We want to start bringing awareness as to what is the conversation that is going on. Like you were saying, is this a bad neighborhood that we don't want to enter? Or, is it a garden where there's just full of weeds and we've just got it? So we basically want to learn how to pluck the weeds. And so as soon as you recognize that there's this internal dialogue that's not serving you, then we want to refrain from following the thoughts any further by relaxing into the breath. So what we want to understand is most people are living from the neck up, right? They're just living here and they're discounting their body. And similarly with breathing, they're just breathing with the top little bits of their lungs, but your lungs go all the way down to your diaphragm. And when you take a proper diaphragmatic breath, sitting right underneath your diaphragm is your adrenal glands. And your adrenal glands are responding to these thoughts that we think, because your thoughts create neuropeptides, and then the neuropeptides affect the hormones that get produced, and then the hormones that get produced affect how you feel. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg problem that we have going here. So, and listen, if you had said to me, hey, Chris, change your thoughts, change your life, when I was struggling,
Yeah.
I probably would have rolled my eyes at you and walked out of the room saying, that's just a bunch of baloney.
Yeah.
But what we want to understand is this cascade that I was just talking about, that it's not so much, you don't actually have, so what I was missing when people were saying that to me was this concept about psychoneuroimmunology, which is basically your thoughts affect your physiology, but also that I thought I had to believe the thought. And you don't have to believe the thought, but understand that that thought creates a different cascade, and then in time you'll actually feel differently. So the relaxing into the breath is a really important piece, because what happens is we shift people into a parasympathetic state, because most people are in a sympathetic state or stressed state, and we need to move. And we talked earlier about diet. Well, diet and nutrition is kind of all for naught if we're not in a parasympathetic state when we're eating.
Right.
Everybody's focused on the food to eat, what type of diet, paleo, keto, whatever. And don't get me wrong, I mean, yes, it is important what you eat, absolutely. But the state you're in when you eat is just as important.
Yeah.
So the breath, I mean, and also to highlight the importance of breathing, what's the first thing we look for when a baby's born? It's their first breath. Right? It's not their first heartbeat. It's their first breath. And at the end of someone's life, it's their last breath.
Right.
So somewhere between the first and the last, we forget how to do it right. Right?
Right.
And so I have this framework. So I ask people to put their right hand on their belly button and their left hand on their heart. And so when you're taking a proper diaphragmatic breath, you can feel that right hand move. And also understand that if you put your hands there with me now, I want you to understand that there's more serotonin receptors between these two hands than there is in your brain. There's more electrical activity happening in your heart than there is in your brain. And as we talked about in the very beginning, there's this gut-brain relationship as well. So I ask people, when they recognize that they're in a bad neighborhood with their thoughts, if we can refrain from following them by relaxing into the breath, and then we take and get them to take these deep breaths, we look outside at something in nature, get your mind to focus on something in nature. Your mind's a busy place. There's a lot going on. But we need to create a little bit of stillness somehow, a little bit of stillness. And the fourth R is to resolve that you have to repeat this process. So that's where I started with my naturopathic doctor. That's what he taught me. And when he taught me that, I was actually depressed. And I said to him, are you kidding me? Like, this is all you're giving me is just to do these 4 R's? Like, what's that going to do? Right. And he just said, so be it. Like, just do it.
Just do it. Yeah.
And I said to him, well, I'm going to be doing this all day long because my thoughts are so bad. And he said, that's okay. Just indulge me. Just indulge me. And so I was sitting there basically recognizing, refraining, breathing, and repeating constantly. And I actually felt, and when I talked to him the following week, I was feeling better. And so the next steps that I've added to that framework is the rephrase. So the 5th step is to rephrase. So whatever that crappy thought is that you had, so let's just say I am unworthy, then the rephrase would be I am worthy. And again, don't get tripped up like me thinking you have to believe that thought. You don't have to believe it. Just say it, because it's going to have a different cascade in your body. And if that's too big of a leap for you, then just go neutral. Like, just say I am. Don't fill in the blank. Okay. And I ask people to write these thoughts down for me, because that gives me insight into your core beliefs about yourself. And then we can work with those.
Awesome.
Yeah. And then the last 2 steps are really just reflect. I've stumbled many times over the last 35 years. And so every time I've stumbled, I reflect, okay, what of the 10 steps that I talk about in Beyond the Label have I perhaps tripped up on?
Left out.
Yeah. And because life happens, right? We get busy. And then the last R is reward. So that speaks to self-compassion. So if you're going through this process, like, when was the last time you were kind to yourself? When was the last time you did something nice for you? Whether, you had a massage, or you bought flowers for yourself, or you decided to treat yourself to a book that you're wanting to read. Like, when was the last time you did something nice for you? And a lot of people can't recall.
Right.
So that's the 7R framework. And So what it does is it helps to break this cycle. And then from there, I teach people how to trust their intuition, listen to their heart, um, and then move into eventually talking about things like soul contracts and get into these shadow beliefs and moving through, if there has been some trauma, then working through that with them, and just understanding that, again, a lot of people are living in the past or the future.
Sure.
And we need to guide people to the only place in reality, which
Which
is
is now.
now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Those, what a great process you've set up. It's really so well structured, and there's such a great container there with you at the helm. That's so powerful, Dr. Chris. Yeah, that is awesome. Thank you for sharing that with our listeners as well. Again, this is What the Health. I'm Dr. Greg Eckel. I've got Dr. Chris on the line with us here. And really, I'm going to put all of your contact information in the notes. Folks that are tuning in now, you can join this the show earlier on. You can go to naturecuresclinic.com and look at the podcast tab. We've got it listed there. It'll be up there forever in perpetuity. I spell
Perpetuity.
it. Just really stumble over that word. So coming down the last couple minutes here, anything else that you would like to share with our listeners on the show?
I think if you have been diagnosed with a mental health condition, whether it's whatever the label may be, I just really want people to understand that you can move beyond that. And there is answers to be found, or there are answers to be found as to answering that question, why? Why is this happening to me? And it really is, I don't feel that we're meant to be living a life of struggle. So the struggles may be there to help you find you, but you don't have to stay in that place of struggle and defeat and despair. I was there for a whole decade, and I really just want people to understand that there is another approach. Sometimes medication is necessary and can be helpful. But I think what's really important to understand is what is the root of, or the root cause of what you're going through. And there may be more than one root to the problem.
Yeah, love that. Thank you so much for coming on today. I've got Dr. Bjorndal on the line here, and we're going to include links to your socials. What's your favorite platform for folks to connect with you on?
Oh boy. Yeah, I probably, it's hard because I would say I have my Facebook page probably, or on Instagram, or through my website.
Okay, and we're including all of those on here. So, whatever your favorite platform is out there, connect up with Dr. Chris, and, get plugged in. If this is your thing, please share this with your loved ones. Get this message out. That was really just an amazing, I really enjoyed our interview today. And, your information, you're definitely the authority in mental health here. And, with that framework that you've established, it's so well thought out and so well articulated as well. So thank you again for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
Yeah, you're welcome.